So today we continue Sidney's apology from where we left. Sidney goes on to speak about the different kinds of poetry and the subdivision of poetry and speaks about the difference between poetry and verse and says that verse is not poetry. So this distinction between verse and poetry is a nice distinction which was not so clear in the Renaissance. Today we are very much aware of the difference between verse and poetry, but during the Renaissance it was still believed that verse, that is anything which is written in meter, is poetry. So you can see that Sidney was quite ahead of his time in his conception about these things. He says the most notable be the heroic, lyric, tragic, comic, satiric, iambic, elegiac, pastoral and certain others. Some of these being termed according to the matter they deal with, some by the sorts of verses they like the best writing. So these are the classifications of poetry that Sidney refers to. Most of these genres of poetry are drawn from classical poetry, like heroic, lyric, tragic, comic, satiric, iambic, elegiac, pastoral. All these forms or genres of poetry can be found in Greek and Roman literature, and the Renaissance continued to write in these different genres. For indeed the greatest part of poets are apparel their poetical inventions in that numbrous kind of writing which is called verse. Numbrous from the word number, which refers to the use of prosody, the use of meter. So in any poem where there is number, there is meter, that is called a verse. Indeed, but apparel, verse being but an ornament and no cause to poetry, since there have been many most excellent poets that never versified, and now so are many versifiers that did never answer to the name of poets. So Sidney says that mere versification is not a sign that something is poetry, because even medical science or some other subject, scientific subjects, astronomy, there are books in ancient literature on these subjects which are written in verse, but that does not make them poetry. Therefore Sidney says that verse is only an ornament of poetry and it is not essential to poetry. In this respect, Sidney differs with a neoclassical writer named Scaliger. So in the Renaissance there were many neoclassical critics, most of them Italian, some French and so on. As I told you that unlike England, in Italy and France there were many writers of critical theory. Sidney is an exception in England. So Sidney refers to these writers from time to time, or without referring to them he just uses their ideas. So here in this concept that verse is not essential to poetry, he differs with Scaliger and follows Minturno. Scaliger was a French neoclassical critic of the Renaissance. So Sidney differs with Scaliger, who thought that verse is essential to poetry, but agrees with the Italian critic Minturno. Who thought that verse is not essential to poetry. So excellent poets who wrote poetry but never wrote in verse. And he gives the example of Xenophon. For Xenophon, who did imitate so excellently as to give us Ephesium Justi Imperii, the portraiture of a just empire, under the name of Cyrus, as Cicero says of him, made therein an absolute heroical poem. So Xenophon's Chiropedia does not use verse. Yet in this poem, Xenophon is able to give a picture of a just empire. I referred to Theagenes and Chariclia and all that earlier. Heliodorus in his Ethiopica, you remember, Ethiopica. The novel, but it can be also understood as a poem. So did Heliodorus in his super invention of that picture of love in Theagenes and Chariclia. Sugared, sweet. So sweet rendering of the love between Theagenes and Chariclia, and yet both these written in prose. So now you may wonder that Ethiopica, I earlier called it a novel, and now Sidney says it is a poem. So you wonder, how is that possible? The reason is that in the 16th, 17th centuries, a novel in the true sense of the term did not arrive. Therefore, any long story written would be judged as a poem, like the medieval romances, which were not in verse. They were also called poems. So the novel that describes a domestic situation, particularly some representation of the middle class, in that sense, as a story of the middle class characters, in that sense the novel rose only in the 18th century. Therefore, these early narratives may properly be called a poem. Alright, therefore for Heliodorus, novel is not very appropriate, even though it can be loosely used. Which I speak to show show that it is not rhyming and versing that maketh the poet, no more than a long gown maketh an advocate, who though he pleaded in armour, should be an advocate and no soldier. A very funny and interesting comment by Sidney. An advocate wears a long gown, but if somebody wears a long gown and makes a speech, he is not automatically an advocate. Similarly, if an advocate wears an armor, that is the kind of a metallic armor that a knight used to wear, like a soldier, like a knight, even then he would remain an advocate and not become a soldier. So the idea here is that that verse is not the essence of poetry, but it is the dress of poetry. And this is similar to something which the Italian philosopher Lorenzo Valla said. Just a minute. Hello. So the Italian philosopher Lorenzo Valla said that rhetoric is the dress of language. And Sidney's comment that verse is the dress of poetry, that is to some extent similar to Lorenzo Valla, who said that rhetoric is the dress and ornament of language. But it is that feigning notable images of virtues, vices, or what else, with that delightful teaching, which must be the right describing note to know a poet by. So here we have the second definition of poetry. I told you that in this treatise, Sidney gives us two definitions of poetry. The first definition we already discussed, and here we have the second definition of poetry. What is it? Feigning notable images of virtues, vices, etc. So feigning means actually inventing, or it may also mean imitating. Imitating of images of virtue, vice, the purpose of which is delightful teaching. So here Sidney once again uses the Horatian idea of utile et vince. utile duce, that is sweet and useful, delightful and teaching. So both didactic as well as entertainment. Which must be the right describing note to know a poet by. Poets have chosen verse as the fittest raiment. Once again, raiment means dress. So the image of dress. So verse is nothing but the dress. Anybody who writes something which both is entertaining as well as instructive, that is poetry, according to this definition. Therefore, it shall not be amiss first to weigh this latter sort of poetry by his works and then by his parts. So, Sidney says that poetry should be examined. Examination of poetry. By his works and by his parts. And if in neither of these anatomies he be condemnable, I hope we shall obtain a more favorable sentence. So, the poet, Sidney imagines, is in the dock, because the poet is being tried by the Platonic criticism or Puritan criticism, and Sidney says that let us examine his works and the parts, and then we will judge him whether he should be condemned or not. And he says this purifying of wit, this enriching of memory, enabling of judgment and enlarging of conceit, which commonly we call learning, under what name soever it come forth, or to what immediate end soever it be directed, the final end is to lead and draw us to as high a perfection as our degenerate souls, made worse by their playing lodgings, can be capable of. So he says that the result or the effect of poetry is very positive, and it leads to perfection of the degenerate soul of man. So, Sidney is defending poetry in the language by which it was attacked by the Puritans. That is, the Puritans' attack was that poetry leads to corruption of man's soul. Sidney says it leads to the perfection of his degenerate soul. And then he says that one of the leading effects is knowledge. So one of the chief goals of poetry, Sidney says, is knowledge or learning, for which there is a Greek word, paideia, which was one of the chief goals of the Renaissance revival of learning, So he says that through knowledge, different kinds of through poetry, different kinds of knowledge can be disseminated, and he even mentions astronomy, philosophy, natural and supernatural philosophers, by which means that natural philosophy, moral philosophy, and so on, music, mathematics, and so on. But all one and other having this scope to know, and by knowledge to lift up the mind from the dungeon of the body to the enjoying of his own divine essence. So the idea that the soul of man is imprisoned in the body was a common idea in the Renaissance. That is why Sidney calls the body the dungeon or the prison. Now, why is this notion that the soul is imprisoned in the body? Because the body is corruptible and mortal. Corruptible and mortal, whereas it was believed that the soul was immortal. Therefore, the immortal soul always wanted to rise and go back to its source, which was God. But it could not leave the body until its death. So the body was the prison house for the soul. Sidney's argument here is that the soul is ennobled by poetry and consequently education. Okay. So the soul is enriched, ennobled, and therefore lifted. That is, lifted above its station, lifted above its station. Now, this is obviously an allusion to the Neoplatonic chain of being, according to which there was a hierarchical chain of being, and man was in the middle of this chain because he was after God, angels, and then below him there were animals, vegetables, material objects, and so on. Therefore, the soul of man wanted to rise in station and move upwards and finally unite with God. Therefore, Sidney thinks that poetry helps man in this upward movement of the soul. So this idea that man's soul was not, man was not fixed in the chain of being, but could freely move upwards or downwards. The freedom of man chain of being was promoted by the Neoplatonic philosopher Pico della Mirandola, the Italian philosopher. So many phone calls are coming today. হ্যাঁ 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 আচ্ছা বলো অরিন্দম কি হয়েছে? হ্যাঁ 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 ঠিক আছে, তোমার ওই কাজগুলো কি হয়ে গেছে? মানে কিন্তু আমি একটু আগে দেখলাম সেপ্টেম্বর ইস্যুটা ও কন্ট্রোল এস। হ্যাঁ ওকে ওকে আচ্ছা আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, তাহলে আমি আরেকবার দেখে নেব। ঠিক আছে ওকে আচ্ছা আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, থ্যাংক ইউ। Sorry about this. Okay. So, Sydney suggests that the soul of man can move freely by virtue of poetry and learning, and then he goes on to speak about the different subjects as they serve different disciplines. So Sydney calls them serving sciences, which means that they are tied to particular topics or particular areas of knowledge, so that they cannot move freely beyond that chosen area. So Sydney calls them serving sciences. His purpose is to show the superiority of poetry among the sciences, which is not limited to any one particular subject. That all these are but serving sciences, which as they have each a private end in themselves, so yet are they all directed to the highest end of the mysterious knowledge, by the Greeks called architectonike, which stands in the knowledge of a man's self, in the ethic and politic consideration, with the end of well-doing and not of well-knowing only. So Sydney says that the ultimate goal of knowledge, according to the Greeks, was to not only to know everything, but also not only to know well, but also to do well. And he says that this idea in Greek, it had a name, architectonike. So it meant knowing well, and mere knowledge does not serve any purpose unless you use that knowledge for the benefit of mankind. Even as the saddler's next end is to make a good saddle, but his further end to serve a nobler faculty, which is horsemanship. So Sidney gives again the example of horsemanship, as he earlier referred to Pugliano, the writer on horsemanship. So you can see the love of horse among the English, and also the continuation of the feudal love of chivalry, where the horse was the most important noble animal. So he says that a saddler who makes a saddle, his immediate purpose is to make a good saddle, but ultimately he wants to serve a nobler discipline, which is horsemanship. And the horsemen want to serve the nobler discipline of soldiery, and the soldier not only to have the skill but to perform the practice of a soldier. So the soldier must not only know how to fight well, but must also be able to fight. So knowing is not enough doing. So this compound knowledge of theory and practice, the Greeks call that architectonike, and Sidney says that poetry enables one to have this kind of fulfilling and useful knowledge, which is both practicable as well as theoretical. So that the ending end of all earthly learning being virtuous action, those skills that most serve to bring forth that have a most just title to be princess over all the rest. So the end of all arts, all disciplines is virtuous action. Or noble action. Wherein we can show the poet's nobleness by setting him before his other competitors. So Sidney says that here I am trying to prove that the poet enables a man to have the most virtuous action, or it teaches virtuous action much better than any other discipline. Then he compares poetry to different subjects. So first he talks about moral philosophy, which was highly praised in the Renaissance, and he says that these men, casting largesse as they go of definitions, divisions and distinctions, with a scornful interrogative do soberly ask whether it be possible to find any path so ready to lead a man to virtue as that which teacheth what virtue is, and teacheth it not only by delivering forth his very being, his causes and effects, but also by making known his enemy vice and his cumbersome servant passion, by showing the generalities that containeth it and the specialities that are derived from it, lastly by plain setting down how it extendeth itself out of the limits of a man's own little world to the government of families and maintaining of public societies. So here he speaks about the challenge to poetry by moral philosopher or philosophers of morality, moral philosophy, and says that they teach by definition, division, distinction. So these are the scholastic tools of analysis, mostly used by philosophers, but actually by all subjects in all disciplines, scholastic tools, definition, division and distinction. And what do they teach, moral philosophers? What is virtue, cause, effect and its opposite vice. So cause and effect, you can see that these are all logical terms, and Sidney was very much influenced by a French philosopher of his time named Peter Remus, who was a great logician, and in whose logic cause and effect were very important. So Sidney says that by plain setting down how it extended itself out of the limits of a man's own little world. So here Sidney is alluding to the Renaissance concept of microcosm and macrocosm. So microcosm, micro means little, cosm is from cosmos, which means the world, and macrocosm, that is the big world. Macro means big. So in the Renaissance it was believed that man was the microcosm or a little world in himself. Who represented the macrocosm or the big world outside. We see the application of this idea even in Shakespeare's plays. For example, in King Lear, we see that there is a storm raging outside when Mad Lear is ranting at the cruelty of his daughters, and in his mind also there is a storm. So there is a harmony between the world outside or the macrocosm and the little world of Lear's mind, the microcosm, that there is also a tempest. Okay. So moral philosophy teaches how a man can ultimately govern families or public societies. And here there is also an implication that the private virtues of man, they should help man to run or organize a public society. Therefore, the virtues appropriate for running the world were called public virtues by Aristotle. So if you remember that Spencer wrote that in the Fairy Queen he wanted to depict 12 private virtues and 12 public virtues, and he wanted to write the 24 books. Each book representing one virtue. He ultimately succeeded in writing 6.5 books. So that is all that remains of the Fairy Queen. So Sidney also here is using this notion of public virtues and private virtues of Aristotle. Then he speaks about the claim of history. The historian scarcely giveth leisure to the moralist to say so much, but he laden with old mouse-eaten records, authorizing himself upon other histories, whose greatest authorities are built upon the notable foundation of hearsay. So can history be imagined as a very ennobling, discipline? Sidney says that the historians depend upon moth-eaten records and on authority, but these authorities themselves are doubtful and are based often on hearsay. So the authorities of history are not very sound. Therefore, even though history makes a lot of claim to truth or fact, much of that is dependent on hearsay or rumor or whatever, popular knowledge, and therefore not dependable. Better acquainted with 1,000 years ago than with the present age, and yet better knowing how this world goeth than how his own wit runneth. So, the great criticism of the historian, who does not know even how his own mind works. And then Sidney says that much of history is table talk, and he quotes from Cicero's De Oratore. Iam testis temporum lux veritatis vita memoriae magistra vitae nuncia vetustatis. So this Latin sentence from Cicero's De Oratore Cicero's De Oratore. It means testis temporum, that is evidence of time, lux veritatis, light of truth, vita memoriae, life of memory, magistra vitae, direction of life, nuntia vetustatis, messenger of antiquity. So these are the claims of history, that it is evidence of time, light of truth, life of memory, direction of life, and messenger of antiquity. The philosopher said he teacheth a disputative virtue, but I do an active. So Sidney is referring to the quarrel between philosophy and history, and the historian claims that the philosopher teaches a disputative virtue, because the philosopher depends on disputation, whereas history takes its lessons from active life. The philosopher teaches the distributive virtue, but I do an active. So you see here the conflict between active life and contemplative life in the Renaissance. It was a common theme in the Renaissance. Vita activa, as opposed to vita contemplativa. Active life as opposed to contemplative life, and the claim of history is that it is dependent on active life. It teaches its lessons taken from active life, whereas philosophy depends on contemplative life and mostly knowledge of the book. So his virtue is excellent in the dangerous academy of Plato, but mine showeth forth her honourable face in the battles of Marathon, Pharsalia, Poitiers and Agincourt. He teacheth virtue by certain abstract considerations, but I only bid you follow the footing of them that have gone before you. Now whom shall we find truly as Meseemed? Whom shall we find to be moderator? Truly as Meseemed the poet, and if not a moderator, even the man that ought to carry the title from them both, and much more from all other serving sciences. So Sidney says that in this quarrel between philosophy and history, one who can be the moderator is poetry, and poetry is not only the moderator, but it should take the title from both of them as being the best discipline, or the discipline that teaches learning in the best way possible. So Sidney praises poetry above history and philosophy because history and philosophy are also serving sciences, as he says that history serves facts, antiquity, philosophy serves contemplation, theory, but poetry combines everything. So poetry can go beyond history and philosophy. As for the divine, with all reverence it is ever to be accepted, not only for having his scope as far beyond any of these as eternity exceeded the moment, but even for passing each of these in themselves. So Sidney says that I am not bringing divinity or religion into this competition, because in the Renaissance theology was an important subject for discipline, and he says that it is always beyond any competition, because just as if you compare a moment with eternity, a moment does not stand in comparison. So theology deals with God, with eternal topics, and therefore I am not taking that into this competition between the sciences. And when I compare the sciences, keeping theology apart, then I see that poetry is the candidate for being the best subject. And then about law, another subject in the Renaissance, he says, for the lawyer, though juice be the daughter of justice, and justice the chief of virtues, yet because he seeketh to make men good, rather formidine poene, that is, out of fear of punishment, than virtutis amore. that is love of virtue. So law makes people follow good out of fear of punishment rather than love of virtue. Therefore, law cannot be considered very noble. So, SCD dismisses law. And these four are all that anyway deal in that consideration of men's manners, which being the supreme knowledge, they that best breed it deserve the best commendation. So these four subjects, they teach man supreme knowledge or men's manners, and therefore they should be praised. So even though they may be praised, Sidney would prove that philosophy, that poetry is much superior to all these subjects, whether history, philosophy or law. Alright, so I will stop here today. If you have any question, you can ask.